In the news tonight, the Senate President calls on the international community to support Jordan in providing aid and assistance to refugees. Russia says it is ready to extend a fragile ceasefire agreement in Syria by an additional 72 hours as UN convoys are still prevented from moving into Syria. And 3 people are killed by Israeli forces in separate incidents in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. Senate President Faisal Al-Faiz said refugees and immigration are 2 of the main issues the world is suffering from today. He added these problems, which are the result of conflicts, crises and instability in the Middle East, are expected to escalate. Addressing the European Conference of Presidents of Parliaments in Strasbourg, Al-Faiz delivered a keynote address on Jordan's vision on the latest developments in the Middle East, mainly the Palestinian issue and the Syrian crisis. Al-Faiz noted that the ongoing crisis and instability in the Middle East have become a threat to global safety and stability. The international community in general and the EU in particular did not pay attention to the immigration and refugees crisis until they started to affect them, he noted. The Senate President also spoke about Jordan as an oasis of stability in the volatile region, calling on the international community to support Jordan to help it continue to provide aid and assistance to hundreds of thousands of refugees. The Senate President reiterated the key role played by parliaments to fight terrorism and terrorist organizations. The Russian Defense Ministry said Russia is ready to extend a fragile ceasefire agreement in Syria by an additional 72 hours. The Kremlin said it was ready to use its influence to get the Syrian army to fully implement a shaky ceasefire agreement, and that it hoped the United States would use its own influence with rebel groups too. The United States told Russia, however, it will not set up a committee to enable joint targeting of militants in Syria until humanitarian aid begins to flow to the besieged city of Aleppo and other areas. The UN Secretary Council will hold a special meeting today on Syria aid crisis. The United Nations said none of the 40 trucks ready to bring aid to eastern Aleppo had moved from no man's land at the Turkish border due to a lack of security guarantees. The trucks, divided into 2 convoys of 20 trucks each, are ready to reach East Aleppo through the supply route of Castello Road, which still has to be secured following the agreement of a shaky ceasefire. It is the United States and Russia who will tell the UN when it's safe for the convoys to drive through. As far as the other besieged and hard-to-reach areas like Mardamiya, Al-Wa'ar or Douma are concerned, the UN is still awaiting the facilitation letters issued by the Syrian government needed to give access to the convoys.
We are as ready to go as we can possibly be. The modalities for ensuring safe passage have not yet been cleared and given to us so that we can move. We know that there is at least 250,000 people in eastern Aleppo who are potentially all of them in need of some kind of aid. The first 40 trucks, as we heard yesterday, are loaded with food for some 80,000 people for a month. And we really, really want to get it to eastern Aleppo. So, as I say, it's highly frustrating. We know the world is watching.
Hundreds of migrants were brought to the Italian port of Augusta after being pulled from the sea off the coast of Libya, while 5 dead bodies were also recovered. The exact causes of the deaths were not yet known, but according to a Coast Guard spokesman, the migrants often travel in inhuman and overcrowded conditions. On the frontier between Europe and Africa, Italy is the focus for hundreds of thousands of migrants fleeing conflict and poverty in Africa, packed into rickety boats by smugglers. 3 men were killed by Israeli forces in separate incidents in East Jerusalem and the West Bank in a flare-up of a nearly year-old wave of Palestinian street attacks. At the heavily patrolled Damascus Gate, a main entrance to Jerusalem's walled old city, a knife-wielding man allegedly attempted to stab police officers and was shot dead by Israeli forces. The military said forces fired at a car carrying 2 Palestinians when it rammed into a civilian bus stop at a junction near the settlement of Kiryat Arba outside the town of Hebron, resulting in the death of one person in the vehicle and wounding the other. Several hours later, a Palestinian stabbed an Israeli officer or soldier at a junction near Hebron, and forces at the scene shot the attacker dead. Violence in the West Bank, East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip has escalated, leaving at least 213 Palestinians killed since October. A suicide bomber blew himself up in a packed mosque in northwestern Pakistan, killing at least 25 people and wounding 30 during Friday prayers. No group immediately claimed responsibility for the bombing in Pai Khan, which is part of the lawless federally administered tribal areas bordering Afghanistan. A local tribal elder said the attack may have been carried out by terrorists seeking revenge after local tribesmen gathered a volunteer force and killed one and captured another insurgent. EU leaders gathered in Slovakia's capital, Bratislava, to try and agree on why people across the bloc are increasingly voting for Eurosceptic parties. They will also agree on ways to regain trust in the EU after Britain's vote to leave the European Union. With governments deeply divided over how to bolster the economy and the Eurozone and respond to an influx of refugees, European Council President Donald Tusk has highlighted 3 priorities: strengthening external border controls, combating terrorism and reassuring people of protection from adverse effects of economic globalization. After being nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, members of the Syrian Civil Defense Group, also known as the White Helmets, will feature in a documentary set to be released globally on internet television network Netflix in September. The White Helmets are said to be made of thousands of volunteers and are often seen in amateur videos posted online, rushing to the scene of airstrikes in civilian areas in Syria and rescuing people from destroyed buildings. Thousands have signed a petition launched online by the Syrian Campaign Group, urging the Nobel Committee to give this year's Peace Prize to the White Helmets. The winner of the Nobel Peace Prize will be announced on October 7th. Apple Inc. fans from Sydney to Shanghai, the first customers worldwide to snap the new iPhone 7 off the shelves, cheered as they left stores today, brandishing their purchases. But underneath the usual fanfare, the crowds of enthusiasts and overnight campers were smaller than in past years. This report has more.
iPhone fans in Australia were the first in the world to get their hands on the latest incarnation. About 200 people queued in light rain at this Apple store in Sydney on Friday for the launch of the iPhone 7. Marcus Barsoom had been queuing since Wednesday for the iPhone 7 Plus version, or any phone in a sought-after jet black. For him, as with many other disappointed fans, it wasn't to be.
I thought Apple being Apple, they'd have, it wouldn't sell out through pre-orders, they'd have some aside for loyal fans like me that line up.
Outside Apple stores in downtown Tokyo, there were smaller crowds than usual. Here too, Apple said initial supplies of the larger 7 Plus model and the new jet black version of the smaller iPhone 7 were sold out. Apple's sales in China are seen as the acid test of the company's year ahead. Despite the queues at this store in Beijing, chatter about the new iPhone on Weibo's been more muted compared to the debut of the iPhone 6. Some analysts say the new incarnation of the iPhone has too few major changes to win over fickle shoppers. Others are praising its new waterproof qualities and upgraded camera. In Hong Kong, people selling on their new iPhone 7 acquisitions right outside the official outlet was rife. Even here, some said the markup of about 800 Hong Kong dollars, equivalent to just over $100 US, wasn't as excessive as in the past.
Richard Gasquet eased past Croatia's Bono Koric to give France a 1-0 lead in their Davis Cup semi-final against Croatia in Zadar. The experienced Gasquet beat his 19-year-old 6-2, 7-6, 6-1 to secure the first rubber for France. Former US Open champion Marion Cilic faces France's Lucas Pouille in the day's second singles match.
Game, set match, France. 3 sets to love, 6-2, 7-6, 6-1.
As world leaders prepare to meet on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly for a summit on the global refugee crisis, a US-based non-profit is trying to help young refugees integrate through soccer. Soccer Without Borders, SWB, was founded in 2006 in Oakland, California, and has since spread to 3 other cities. The organization serves refugee youth from 17 different countries, including 4 of the 5 top countries with the most refugee arrivals in the US, such as Iraq, Somalia, Bhutan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. In addition to education, the program offers an opportunity to build friendships and simply fit in. And finally, the weather forecast for the rest of tonight across many regions with northwesterly light winds. Normal summer conditions will prevail tomorrow with a high of 28 degrees in Amman, while it will be relatively hot in the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea. The Gulf Aqaba should expect a relatively hot day tomorrow. Northerly moderate winds and choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to close here our top stories once again, the Senate President calls on the international community to support Jordan in providing aid and assistance to refugees. Russia says it is ready to extend a fragile ceasefire agreement in Syria by an additional 72 hours as UN convoys are still prevented from moving into Syria. And 3 people are killed by Israeli forces in separate incidents in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. And with that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Balkar. Thank you for joining us.